of keeping us on schedule, I'm going to suggest that people have questions for Keith, talk to him at the break. We've left a fair bit of time on the agenda for discussion at the break. But I think that what Keith has really done is show actually the even broader context in which we're working beyond the narrow, which I think the stakes really are that high. I want to take the next maybe 20, 25 minutes just to set the stage and of where we are, and then we're going to spend the rest of the meeting on the more crunchy specifics of the working groups and of the projects and the like. I want to start. Hopefully, I can get this thing to work. Let's see. Can you please advance that slide or put my slides up? I want to start by by welcoming all of you and by thanking all of you for coming. And if the person in back could try and get my slides working, that would be great. It was actually just a year ago, a little over a year ago, that even the idea of doing this came to be. And even though we've only just begun to touch on this historic challenge and opportunity, I do think the people in this room and the people not in this room who are working on this can feel pride. I'm certainly proud to be a part of it, that people actually decided to act instead of just watching, to actually come together and try and do it instead of doing it in our own silos only, to have actually focused often on the greater good than just what our individual needs are, and also to have focused on making real progress and holding our feet to the fire, that we make real progress and not just talk about it. And I think that those are all really significant aspects of what we're doing. I apologize for the slides, by the way. We're dealing with some Mac PC incompatibility. Imagine if we had that working, then we would really be on the step towards our interoperable world that we envision. But I'm not going to go through in any detail some of these opening slides, except to say I think we all do feel that we are living through the midst of a revolution, fueled by the ability, not just in genomics, but actually in society at large, to collect and manage and analyze unprecedented amounts of data, and that if we could learn from these data, not only would we advance science, we could improve health, and even in the narrow case of interpreting genomes, I think we would all agree that today we have essentially no ability to read genomes. If reading is the act of you look at text and you understand its meaning, what we have is the ability to write down genomes. We can actually take the blood or the DNA and figure out the sequence, but we don't have the ability to say, well, if you change that, this is what the outcome will be. And the only way that we're going to make progress then in the narrow case of genomics or the broader context that Keith described is to be able to make comparisons. Because in the end, that description that Keith gave was one of an approach which is fundamentally comparative, that you compare someone with a severe disease to the population or more subtle differences within the population or a cancer that arose and compare it to the normal tissue. Eventually, by doing that, we probably will learn rules. And from those rules, we will eventually perhaps be able to make predictive models and to be able to read. But we don't have those evidence bases yet. And if we don't attend to that, this promise, I think, will be lost. So it will ultimately, I think I would argue, I think you'd all agree, take millions of genomes and associated information to make these, to learn these rules and to build these comparators. And the reason is that every disease, every state is itself going to take a substantial amount of data. And as Keith was just telling us about traumatic brain injury, just one of hundreds or thousands of conditions, the work that it would take. And of course, there's many populations and environments around the world. So even if you did it in one place, it's not clear that it would be the same because context matters. But right now, I think as we all know, our data is in silos. It's extremely hard to exchange information. There's incredible heterogeneity of the rules of the road. And so the outcome that we would predict if we do nothing is US electronic health records, where I still consider it a tragedy and a scandal that when somebody in my city has had the lifetime of care at hospital X, and then when they get cancer, they want to walk across the street to hospital Y, it is absolutely impossible to convey that information. It is put into a big paper bag with a stack, I'm a physician by the way, a stack of papers this big that no one could possibly read. And so it's as if you're starting from scratch. So if we don't think that there's a bad outcome here to be had, if we think we can just sort of glibly move on, I think that we are mistaken. The other thing I think that we've learned, and certainly this is an evolution in the course of this process, not from where we began, I would say, is the recognition that that the future is fundamentally federated. And what I mean by that is that it is not possible to envision, at least I don't think it's possible to envision, a serious outcome, a serious and realistic outcome, in which there's a single monolithic database in which all data exists, or a world in which all health information is freely available without any management or restriction of use. And so fundamentally, it means that we're going to end up with a federated network. And of course, the good news is our lives have all been transformed by a federated network. We all have our little devices, and they have the connections through the internet and the web and secure e-commerce and all these things. So we have a model, if you will, of how information can exist in many places and yet be highly useful. And we also have a remarkable cultural shift that's ongoing with the sort of world of how people share information, and also that the collection of data, for health in particular, is being democratized. If it was once the case that even things as simple as genome sequencing largely went on in a few places, it now will go on everywhere. And similarly, if there were specialized measurements that could only be made in a clinic or in a doctor's office, it will be possible probably to make it on a device that you wear. And so the question is, how will we take this coming world and learn from it? So what we came to believe was that what was needed are trusted routes to share, exchange information, managing these issues of privacy and consent and autonomy, that we have to act quickly, because right now there's not much legacy data and there are not established incumbents, at least in the realm of genomic data and some of these new technologies. I think everybody has seen how once you end up in a world, as we, again, live in with health records in general, where there's tremendous amounts of legacy data and established incumbents and all sorts of barriers, it's extraordinarily difficult to change that system once it exists. But right now, no such system exists, and so there's a chance, I think, to get it right. Another thing I think that's needed is to respect the diversity of views. In this room, there are not only the diversity of views that exist in Silicon Valley between the academics and the industry representatives and governments, but there are people from different countries, people with fundamentally different views about how we should manage and deal with individual and collective data. And I think that we have to realize that autonomy means that's everyone's right to figure out in their society and in their own way what to do. And we have to figure out, while staying true to certain principles, that we also respect a diversity of views. And so I really do believe that it is up to people in this room and other people in rooms like this to make this happen. I don't think it's going to happen on its own. And so I think the work we are doing together has the potential to matter a lot. It will only matter a lot if we actually succeed. So I'm not going to go through this slide except to remind everybody, because we are only meeting for the second time, and there are people in this room who weren't in the room before, and so just to remind us that the idea of forming this alliance goes back about 18 months. It is not actually a long time ago. There was an initial meeting, which was really at a very high level, identifying these problems. A bunch of people who'd been to a lot of meetings about these problems and felt they weren't making a lot of progress, who wanted to try and do something about it. And the idea emerged of an alliance modeled on the World Wide Web Consortium, an organization with a successful history of having a very positive impact on the world through interoperability, and to do something like that in this domain. It led to the writing of a white paper over 6 months with over 80 authors. And actually, by the time we publicly announced the intent to form an alliance, there were 73 organizations who signed a letter of intent to do that. By the end of 2013, the working groups were formed, another 100 organizations had signed up, and we had a name, the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. That itself took a fair bit of work to get one that people agreed with. And in the, we didn't do the parking problems and naming. Those are the complicated things. So, any event, in the spring, in the first half of this year, those working groups started to take on a life of their own and to produce highly valuable products that you're going to hear about. We had our first meeting. I want to thank the Wellcome Trust again, which hosted that first meeting. 180 people came. And things have begun to emerge that we're going to hear about today. And in addition, projects started to be built by the members to now start taking use of this, or in some cases to drive actually the creation of new methods. We say if we don't actually, because if you don't really do these things, there's no way to actually know what you need. But those projects began to take hold. And in addition, we've moved from intent to form an organization to actually having an organization. The mission of that organization, if I can get these slides to move, is to accelerate progress in human health by helping to establish a common framework of harmonized approaches that enable effective and responsible sharing of genomic and clinical data, and to catalyze data sharing projects that drive and demonstrate the value of data sharing. And this is actually something that is not necessarily unusual in other domains, but I would argue, at least in my experience, is unusual in the life sciences and in healthcare. Most of the experience I've been involved in is one goes and does it oneself. One says, we'll form a project, and from that project, the whole rest of the world will align with it, and the whole rest of the world will be transformed by my individual project. And that can work. But in other fields, in other domains, in particular in electronics and information technology, there's also a history of deciding to create these harmonized approaches and interfaces that make it possible when your phone, you call someone in another country, it rings there, and they can pick up the phone. And so around this idea, there are now 141 organizations that have now signed on, and I'll just note, I'm not going to focus on this, that's not why we're here today, but actually with a constitution, I want to thank in particular Martin Bobrow and Kara Jennings, who worked very hard on that, but all of you who gave comments. And now there are 141 organizations who have adopted this constitution, actually in the first month of being able to do so, and actually there are many others who are in the process of doing so. And the thing that's really exciting, and in my experience unique, is the range of organizations that are arrayed around this. So it's not just the usual suspects in our field of research institutes or maybe some academic hospitals. There are those involved not only in those domains and in healthcare delivery, but disease advocacy groups and patient groups, funders of research, life science companies, information companies. Of course, we could use and benefit from deeper engagement in these and other domains, but it's a really interesting discussion that at least is different than the ones that I've been a part of before. We thus far have organizations in 23 countries that have adopted the Constitution, and we know that we need to do more work to broaden that, and and there are active efforts ongoing, but again, it's an interesting and useful start. And we've defined what it is that we do together in this alliance, because one of the dangers of something like this is it becomes a Rorschach test, and everybody who looks at it who's a participant, let alone outside, says, oh, well, this is what I think we should do. And we spent a lot of time in the first years debating what do we do and what we don't do. And what we came to for this organization, recognizing that the members of the organization do so many things and we don't want to either be duplicative or competing with them, but also enable them, is we will convene. So we're doing that here today, and we'll do it in other settings to try and bring people together around that. We will try and catalyze sharing of data. So catalysis can work in a number of ways. You can catalyze by bringing things together. You can catalyze by lowering the activation energy. That could be there's something that gets in people's way, and we figure out some method or tool or regulation is needed in order to do that. You could do it by trying to help organize and support projects. So we will do all those things. We will try and create, or better said, we're trying to have sort of pithy statements here that have some nice rhythm to them, but identify where they already exist and create where they don't, harmonized approaches. We'll try and be a clearinghouse to convey information. We will do our best to foster innovation, and we will collectively commit to this idea of improved knowledge sharing for the goals that Keith described. And in these things, you'll note, it's not the collecting of the data, the hosting of the data, the actual delivery of the results. That's all things that we all do in our other roles as members in our organizations and our private lives, but we come together to try and create this interactive network. The projects that have actually, the process I should say, the progress since that meeting, the last meeting in March, has actually been, to my mind, very gratifying and very impressive on behalf of all, just looking at what all of you have done and the people who are not in this room. And this is actually, not all the progress has been done, this is just some highlights. But and we're going to hear about it, so I'm not actually going to go into detail, but I want to highlight the progress, the working groups themselves in their own domains, the specific projects you're going to hear about, and also, again, the work of establishing a firm and hopefully suitable governance for this organization. And I want to just point to two things, but again, this is just a taster to whet your appetite. But the framework for responsible sharing of genomic and health-related data that the Regulatory and Ethics Working Group drove and that you will hear more about is really actually, I think, quite fundamental. I didn't actually understand it at first when I heard about it, but I came to understand it, and now I think it's really fundamental, which is to say that all of the existing frameworks are based on protection from harm. And there are reasons for that, and of course we can never forget those important characteristics. But this new framework that you'll hear more about and that you can read about, and many of you contributed to, is based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, that it turns out in Article 27, which of course I was very familiar with before my colleagues actually explained this to me, actually states that it is the right of every individual of the world to share in scientific advancements and its benefits, and in addition to other attributes that protect their rights as people who might produce data. And this is actually a fundamental shift in how one might think about this idea of data sharing. And I think it is potentially quite profound. Another example I want to just mention, and you'll hear more about how that framework was developed, and you can read about all the organizations that have contributed to it and arrayed around it. The other thing I want to highlight, if I can get the slides to move forward, I'm having a little trouble here, is the work of the data working group, and in particular this very exciting developer site. And I heard that there was a great meeting yesterday with many people engaged and excited, but there is, for the first time in my experience, I've been in this field for almost 18 years, a really dynamic community working the way that other people in information technology do, with people contributing, people driving progress. Of course, we need to, as in all of these things, this is a start, figure out how to make sure we're tackling the most important problems, moving them forward, and building real momentum. But I think the fact that this exists today and is already producing specific, tangible products is really a remarkable advance for our field. And I think that in addition, the flagship projects that have gotten started, in particular, again, not the only ones, the Beacon, the Matchmaker Exchange you'll hear about, and the BRCA Challenge, are things that, as they come forward, and if, again, I always say if, because I'm not going to take for granted that we will succeed. I'm going to worry deeply, as you all hopefully will, lie in bed at night worrying about, are we going to really deliver on these things? But if these things come to pass, they will actually have a big impact on the world. One slide on governance, which is simply to say that this was an organization that in its first year or year and a half was a letter of intent. It wasn't really an organization. It was a group of people who said, we're going to create an organization. And so the hard work was done to write a constitution and to circulate it for comments, and we had lawyers involved in all this, and to get your input and to say, we're going to convert this now from an intention to form this organization to actually having formed it, which in some ways, because it's gone well so far, and I think we can maybe even don't tempt the evil eye, but it seems like it's gone very well, but was a moment of great risk, because had it turned out that this didn't succeed, we would have said we were going to create an organization, and then we didn't. But we did. And in fact, this constitution, which many people reviewed and is available on the website, was sent around to the over 200 organizations that had signed the letter of intent, and it's been, Peter, how long? It's been 4 weeks or something like that? What? Just about 4 weeks. 141 organizations have already adopted the Constitution and joined as organizational members, and that's actually quite remarkable, because I don't think in my city I could get, the organizations we work with to agree to, many things in that period of time. So it's really quite remarkable that I think it's a testament to the quality of the Constitution that was written by my colleagues, and also the enthusiasm in the community for this, that we now are in that stable situation, or more stable situation. So I'm just going to close with just a couple of comments about the meeting here today. So who is here today? Based on the registration as of this morning, 262 people registered for this meeting, representing 162 organizations. That's quite remarkable, actually. 114 of those organizations are organizations that are members or in the process of converting with letter of intent, but there are actually 48 other organizations represented in this room who had not previously been involved. And we're excited you're here, and we'd be very excited to have you as part of this organization. People in the room are from 23 countries. Yes, it is the case, lest anyone pointed out, that the majority of the people in the room are from the United States and also from the UK. That's in part because we're at the American Society of Human Genetics in America, and so it's not surprising. But actually, I think it's terrific that there are 23 different people from 23 countries, and we are talking about, and it's something that can be discussed as well, having meetings in other parts of the world. So we should say we had our first meeting 6 months ago in England. We're having a meeting here now. We are planning meetings in other parts of the world that will allow us to broaden that for those, because we can't expect and don't expect that we would do all this in North America and in the United Kingdom or Europe and involve the whole world. We will be going to other places as well. And I want to also note, just in case you're in the room, so you already are aware, but there is an open session, information session on Monday at the American Society of Human Genetics, and if you have friends or colleagues who are here who are interested to learn more, please encourage them to come. So what are our goals for the next few days, just to sort of wrap this up? I say next few days because it's not actually the only event today. There was a working group meeting yesterday, there are working group meetings tomorrow, and then there's the information session on Monday. Just some goals are obviously to share progress and gather input across this alliance. This is a diverse group of people. Some of you are deeply engaged in an activity. Some of you have not yet had a chance to get engaged, and nobody sees the full scope of what's going on because there's so much going on. So one thing we want to do is talk to one another and share that progress. We're going to focus largely on the working groups and the projects and what they are delivering and what their goals are. We do with this meeting, but also the other meetings and the open session, hope to broaden the community because, again, this is only going to work if people are involved and also take up these things. And we're going to hope to reach some continued alignment and commitment because this is a complicated path. And one of the best ways to fail is to try and do too many things or try and not have any sense of where we're going to make a difference. So there is a need, even though these are broad goals, to pick some specific things that will actually drive to having real impact. And as we look at where we are, there's both long-term vision but short-term needs. So in the near term, I and the steering committee, I think, would argue that what's really necessary at this stage, having gotten to where we are in this project, we need to demonstrate value. So we have some interest, we have your interest, we're grateful to all be together here, but I think we all know that if we don't actually move the needle in some way that we think is important, then this won't hold everyone's attention, and probably it shouldn't. And so we need to be very, I think, really incisive about what are the tangible goals for the working groups and the projects that will make a difference. Not change the world entirely, but move the needle enough that we demonstrate this model can work and that we're making real progress. We need to make sure just that the organization can be sustainable or move along, and we think we're doing well there, and also increase our engagement. We are still not engaging as broadly around the world as we need to. And those, I think, are the short-term goals for the next, say, year or two. In the longer term, what Keith talked about, and I'm not going to go through it, is, of course, achieving that there is this network that he described, that there's real value being obtained, so it's not enough just to meet some goal and to have some interfaces and to be sharing. We need to actually test the hypothesis in the long run that we really benefit as a society. And we're going to need to change the culture. And this is the last thing that I'm going to say before turning over the podium, which is that we didn't really talk that much in the last meeting, but I think it's important just to make sure we put on the table for everyone to think about that culture and incentives matter, okay? We have talked about the things that can happen if we do this, but this is going to require changes in behavior on the parts of many stakeholders. And we shouldn't be naive, okay? This will require changes in culture, and cultures are changed not only through best wishes and good discussions, but also through incentives. And I think that the way, at least that is most direct, that we create an incentive to do this is actually by creating value that people benefit from. And so we're not obviously here going to create the economic incentives or other kinds of incentives. That's what we can think about for the researchers, how we reward people for sharing and all that. But in the end, I think people are motivated by making a difference. And I think that if we can show that your work goes better, you can do more, you can do it with less trouble, you can discover more things, you can provide better patient care, you can offer better products, whatever it is that you do, you can help the members of the community that you advocate for. If we can see that happening, that will create the incentive, and then we'll have to support that culture. But we haven't spent our time, there's not a long discussion here today about incentives and culture, but we wanted to mention it just to be clear that we realize that in the end is critical. So I just want to close my talk by thanking a few people. I want to thank the staff who made this meeting possible, and in particular, Peter Goodhand and Jennifer and other colleagues around who organized the logistics of the meeting and who helped all of you do this. I want to thank all the working groups and my colleagues on the steering committee. I want to thank all of you for volunteering your time and energy, not just to be here today, but your inspiration and thoughts on the working groups. And I want to make it clear that we are the alliance, like we are this effort, the people in this room and other people like us. It's not other people who are going to do it. We're going to do it, and we're going to do it, I think, for ourselves and our work. We're going to do it for our children and our communities, and we're going to do it because we think it's the right thing to do. And I personally thank you because I really do believe the stakes are high, and I think that if we don't act, If people like us don't act, then we can't be surprised when it doesn't turn out the way we'd like the world to turn out. And for many of us, this is our life's work in one way or another. And I think we all want to be able to look back 25 years from now and say the benefits that we said could come from the kind of things we do actually came. And I personally believe that what we're doing here today is really critical to being able to achieve that goal. So I will leave that slide up to thank the sponsors, because we also wouldn't have the room and the food if it wasn't for the multiple organizations who generously contributed. I'm not going to go through them in detail. And I'm going to now turn to the next part of our agenda, which is we're going to just dive in and start hearing about accomplishments and our working groups. And the first one up will be regulatory and ethics. I think Bartha and Kazuto are going to come up. And we're a few minutes behind schedule, but we also built in breaks, so I think we're okay. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to them.